start with the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first up on the agenda is Visitor Citizens Forum. Linda, has anyone signed up?
Nobody signed up.
No one has signed up. All right, then moving ahead. We have a public hearing scheduled on proposed 2021 budget to provide an opportunity for citizen comment. Town council may adopt the budget with or without amendment after one reading. Has anyone signed up for the public hearing?
No one signed up.
Okay, so you want to
Close the public hearing.
All right, so we have a motion to close the public hearing. Second. Matt's got the second. All those in favor? Thank you. All right, next up, we will have a public hearing to schedule a proposed combined property tax rate of 45 cents for $100 for opportunity for citizen comments. Then has anyone asked to sign up for this?
No one asked to sign up.
No one asked to sign up?
I make a motion to close.
Eric's got a motion to close the public hearing. All those in favor?
I'm sorry. Yes, no.
Second.
Second is Daryl, sorry. Everybody vote, thank you, okay. Next up, consent agenda. These items are self-explanatory. We've got the minutes. There's an item there, interlocal agreement for federal coronavirus relief funds. So in there, we'll discuss this a little bit later, but originally the coronavirus relief funds for the government, the original program had the funding was based on cities' budgets, the amount of additional funds they spent on coronavirus relief above and beyond their budget. So it was an incremental costing approach. And so the rules were highly complicated because essentially you had to prove that we wouldn't have spent this money if it wasn't for the virus. So everybody was kind of struggling to come up with the right way, and there were a million questions back to the Treasury Department to clarify things. And, it becomes prove what you would have done, which is kind of hard to do with a budget. So at that point, we were not going to participate because I couldn't prove any incremental. Even if Linda was out providing, first aid, we didn't change her salary. So there was just no opportunity for us under the original rules. So subsequently, after much back and forth, in I believe maybe late June, the federal government revised it, and because states went back and said, look, you're missing the point. But no matter what the budget was, the budget assumed a certain amount of revenues too. And because of the economic, meltdown, our revenues are cratering. So even if we planned on not spending the money extra, our revenues have cratered. So we needed to bridge our budget gap, no matter what it was, whether it was planned for or not. So the government went back and kind of rethought it, and they revised the rules. And the new rules were basically, you can use it on any budget item, whether you can use it to replace any of your budget if it's for any COVID relief. Okay, so then it became a cost recovery rather than an incremental cost thing. It's now you can recover any cost you've spent. And they said by definition, we're going to make this easier. By definition, any expenses for first responders, any of them, no matter what they are, all qualify. You don't need to justify it. It's a given. They meet the criteria, all of it. So at that point, I started making some calls to Denton County, and I talked with the Little Elm new fire chief and the head of public safety, and got back with Denton County. And anyway, they agreed that our fire and EMS payments are for our first responders, and they would qualify. So after that, we went through the paperwork. I filled out the paperwork and did the grant request and opened up a bank account, which is also here, and submitted all the requests for federal funding. For us, what we're eligible for is $50,270. And since March 1st, which by coincidence we paid our fire and EMS contract on March 5th. So we're good. So that's the federal program. I put that in the budget. So it's in the budget. We'll talk to that when we get to the budget. Eric's going to ask what's the likelihood we're going to get the funds. And so the answer to that is obviously we've already been approved. So it's already been approved, our funding. So we're just waiting on the money. Okay. But part of that is two things. One is we have to have an interlocal agreement with Denton County to get the money. That's what this is. Second is we have to open up a bank account, and the council has to approve all new bank account opening and closing. That's part of our financial controls. So that's why those two items are there on consent. So, all right. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay. So I need a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, Daryl's got the motion to approve.
Second.
And Matt's got the second. All those in favor? All right, thank you. All right, now we go to the regular agenda. My first item up is the consideration of the MDD budget. So I met with the MDD board, and they worked on their budget. One of the nice things about the MDD... Yeah, that would be easier. Okay, so the MDD budget, the MDD basically has about $30,000 of cash flow. You get about $20,000 in taxes, and Rocky Point Water has a surplus of about $10,000. Last month they went over $50,000 in the bank, so they've got $50,000 sitting there, and their revenues they're expecting this year are going to be around the around the $30,000 range. One of the things that the MDD has done, which we'll see when we get to the budget, is we make a interest payment in July on our loans, and the MDD went ahead and made that interest payment for us in July. And that freed up about $7,000 that we still have now in our debt servicing. So the MDD made that payment for us. I've asked the MDD to make our interest payments, both of them next year, for our 2014 bonds. So the way our bond payments work next year is basically for the old bonds, we're paying about $170,000 because we're in year 7, paying $170,000 principal and about $10,000 in interest. So I've asked the MDD to pay that 10. For the new bonds, our payment is about $200,000 in interest and about $20,000 in principal because it's the very first year. So we're on the hook for that. So I asked the MDD to do some thinking about some projects for us and fill in some gaps, and that's kind of what the MDD has done. As you can see, they had town events were about $4,000 take up the town events. We're going to have to replace the street signs in town. I think we know that all the blades have to change because of the federal guidelines. So they've stepped in and said they'll pay for all new street signs for the city. The interest payment is $12,000 next year for the interest payment on the 14 bonds. And I asked them if they would go in with us and get a sign for the entrance, actually a flashing sign for the basically for no lake access. Try and keep people out that are searching for the lake. Try and minimize the amount of traffic driving through the city in search of.
We're still having a big problem with
We're having a big problem with that in Shores.
Really?
And it's worse because of the road construction.
Oh, yeah.
So not only are they lost, but they're lost and driving randomly down the road.
I had to redirect probably 4 cars last week.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It's because they made that one sign out there a lot bigger. And they stop. You can tell when they're lost.
Linda, whatever happened to the auction?
The last that I saw, we did not make a number of it. They were going to talk to you about bidding. I knew that the two is just find one of them, but I don't have a result.
Okay.
I can find out.
Yeah, I never heard. There were actually some of these signs are up for auction by NTTA, so we started bidding on them. seeing if we went and looked at them. We actually drove down to Carrollton and looked at them. And, they were a little beaten up, but they were still working. They just needed some paint. So I guess what the MDD is basically doing is they're going to pledge next year's entire cash flow to the city. I asked them if they would prefer to move money to the city, and they said no. They actually prefer to do individual tasks, so they can start something, end it. So they, rather than just saying, here's your road payment next year is $400,000. Here's $25,000. Here's a lump sum. They would prefer to tackle tasks, and I think that's smart.
That's a good idea. That's a better idea.
And they're still sitting on $50,000. So this basically keeps them. They're pledging all of next year's revenue to the city, but they're still in really good shape.
What's the sign?
The sign what?
Flashing sign.
We were talking about getting one of the ones that have the arrow pointing, like lane closed ahead.
Oh.
We were going to put one of those right at the entrance to say no lake access.
I see. I got you.
And we still may do that now. I looked at the rental. The rental's about $1,500 a month.
We were not successful at the auction. They sold for $2,400 each.
Okay.
Is there any more coming up? Because that's a lot cheaper than $1,500 a month.
Right. So we'll keep our eye out for them. But anyway, that was something that was in the works. So they came through it. I appreciate what they're doing. They've stepped up and said they're willing to jump into help us out, because it's $25,000. That's going to help us. Okay. So you kind of see what they've got there. The sales tax is doing well. They're way over budget, way over collection rate. They're doing very well. And I would say they're, as far as the Rocky Point water system goes, they have a $20,000 reserve sitting there in case they need any equipment or anything. And they just replaced one of the pumps. They just bought a brand new pump to replace it. It was one of the original ones that we put in from the city when we got the system, when we got it running back in 2010. And that pump was $2,000. And they have a $20,000 reserve. So they're well capitalized. In other words, we're not putting a strain on them. Does anybody have any questions about their budget? Nope. I think they're doing a great job.
The operators
The operator fee stayed the same. If you look at year to date, it's only 3 quarters.
I got you. 3 quarters. I got you.
Sales tax for the MDD. I mean, it's right now they're 21,000 with. That was as of July 14th, so they still have 2 more months to go, and they're at 21,000. The budget was 17, so they're about 50% over budget right now. I mean, collection-wise, and that's because of people just like us using the Lakewood Village. And I'm probably going to say in the mayor's letter, but whatever you buy from the rock yard across the street, that sales tax comes to us, and it's free delivery. So it's like a double bonus, So if you need, topsoil, if you can get it there, it's good for the home team for a couple reasons. If you go to, Lowe's and buy it, we don't get any of that sales tax at all. So I'll probably put that in the mayor's letter, trying to reinforce that again. But
they were really good because I ordered from them recently.
yeah, should free delivery.
Right, yeah.
Free delivery. Okay. Okay, so everybody good with the MDD budget? All right, I need a motion to approve their budget.
I'll make a motion to approve that MDD budget.
Okay, Matt's got the motion, and Eric's got the second. All those in favor? All right, thank you very much. All right. Next up is a consideration of our fiscal year 2021 budget. A couple things here. I made some minor modifications to it. If you were to look at the, I added a line, it's just on this page alone, so I added a line there for the CRF grant. So that's going to be in the budget because $30,000 is what we spent for the current year, which we get reimbursed at. The other $20,000 we can use to pay next year's fire and EMS because it comes due before December 30th. So we're going to get a $20,000 benefit. The other $30,000 is here under the actuals, but there's no reason for us to do a budget amendment now to change. It's already, the year's already over. So we're just going to let that go. Okay? The only other items here, everything else stayed the same. I updated the actuals to be as of the end of July. There's really nothing going on other than we're doing well. You can see our operating surplus year to date right now with 2 months to go is $225,000 is our surplus. So we are having a phenomenal year. We're ahead in pretty much every single revenue line. Sales tax, we're at $44,000 with 2 months to go. We'll probably be in the 50 plus range. And our budget was 30. So as you can see, we are doing just phenomenally well. We did get our final delinquent taxpayer. The last house that was delinquent paid a couple days ago. So we collected, we're missing about $1,500 in taxes now, which are people that are paying quarterly. So every delinquent taxpayer has paid us. So we have no delinquent. We have 100% payment. So that number is actually about another 6,000 or 7,000 higher today, as you see. That's the July 31st. So yes.
Does the relief fund have an expiration on it in terms of do we ever owe that money back? That why it's sitting in a separate account?
No, what they wanted to do is it has to be accountable, auditable. So the money went to the county. So the county got, let's say, I'm making this up, like $1 billion. The county decided we're going to take that and say $200 million is for rent relief, $200 million is for business grants, $100 million is for the food bank, $500 million is for cities. But they're auditable at the county. The county pushed it down to us to say, you have to keep a paper trail in case we get audited. You got to provide the support, documentation. So we want you to set up a segregated fund that will deposit the money, and then you can move it anywhere you want. But basically, you're on the hook for your own bookkeeping. Well, for us, it's easy because we have to cancel checks to Little Elm Fire and EMS. It's easy because we're doing just straight EMS reimbursement. So we'll put in that segregated fund, and come October 1 at 12:03 a.m. when I'm here at City Hall, I'm going to be moving that money immediately out into the general fund and pay Little Elm. And then that account gets closed. Then it's wiped out. Okay. But that's why it's a line for next year's budget, because we know, but I'm not gonna line it now. But you can see everything looks great. I mean, we're generating a phenomenal amount of cash this year, which is, according to plan, just like we thought we would. And this will come up when we get to the roads. But you can see that we're budgeting for next year a surplus of $198,000. I know it's hard to read. Right, so our budget next year is $198,000 surplus on just the general fund. We'll come back to that number later. So everything here looks pretty good. The only thing down here at the bottom, I added this section to make it a little bit clearer. All right. Down here at the bottom, so our taxes for next year, the property tax is going to be $220, and the general fund, we're going to have to transfer in $177 out of our surplus. And the MDD is going to make a payment of $12,318. Well, that is what we owe for the 2014 interest payment. So they're going to offset that one. We have to pay this principal payment of $168 on the old bonds, and then here's the new bonds. That makes sense? So here's our 4 payments that are due. The MDD will cover one. our 20 cents of debt servicing, the 20 cents will cover some of it, and then we'll plug it with some of our surplus. That's how we make our bond payment. Again, most cities don't do this. They don't transfer money out of their operations to plug it. They just jack up the INS. So our property, our debt servicing would be $400.
The 213.
No, that's the interest. It's because it's a 20-year loan.
Mortgages, always, most of it goes to interest first few months.
Now, as soon as we get to 2024, these go away, right? These are paid off. So when those get paid off, this flips the other way. So once those are paid off, our bond payment goes up higher on the 2020s, and now we pay off we're going to start paying off the principal. So there'll be like $200,000 in principal that'll get paid off. We flip it.
It overlaps 4 years, right?
It overlaps 4 years, correct. Yes.
I think that's important to emphasize, right? Because we're making 2 bond payments over the next 4 years.
4 years.
Which is where that tax conversation is important.
Right. And that's why for those 4 years, we've had to backload the principal on the new bonds. It's lower in the first 4 years, and then it rockets around the other way, and we start paying down the debt. That's just the way we had to do it in order to double up. Okay? So that's showing more clearly this kind of trade-off that we're going to have to do for the next 4 years. And as you can see, the budget surplus next year is budgeted to be 198, right? And we're going to transfer 176 of that, 177, to plug the gap. So we're fine. Our surplus covers the amount we've got to plug. And that's why, instead of raising the debt a nickel, like we did before, I only raised it 3.5 cents. We're at 16.5 cents now. Our long-range planning was we'd add a nickel to that to offset some of the new bond, and we'd make up the difference with savings. Well, we're doing so well, the 2 things. One is we only had to raise it 16.5 to 20, and the second is we won't have to go into our savings. We're actually having a bigger surplus, 198, than we need to jump into to plug it. So it's really good. We're doing very well. We're going to have no problem making the double bond payments, is what I'm saying. We're going to be just fine. Okay? All right. So the other things in here that I want to talk about is when you get to the utility fund. A couple things now have come up. So a couple things have come up. All right. Everything here looks pretty good. The revenue numbers are doing great as usual. I mean, we're doing very well. Utility fund is doing fine. The only other issues here were, as you can tell, year to date we've spent about $120,000 on CapEx, and that's because we're continuing to have to work on things under the street. Yesterday we replaced the sewer line under Green Meadow because we had a couple houses that are new. That sewer line was put in 40 years ago, so now there's a house there. We actually cambered it. So one of the things we tried to get ahead of is we cambered all the sewer lines that go under Green Meadow. Because nobody's built houses there in over 40 years. Now they are. We weren't even sure if the sewer lines were there. Well, most of them are in good shape. They're clay tile. One of them was fractured. It was terrible. So we had no choice. We had to dig it up and relay the line under Green Meadow. So now I'm confident when we put the sewer line in, we won't have to bore under it or anyway disturb that, because the sewer line's on the opposite side of everybody's building, right? It's on the lake side.
The way you replace is the one that crosses under the street?
Under the street, right. So from the guy's property line up in his yard, starts at his property line. That's our pipe all the way under the street to the other side, where the manholes are. We have to replace that whole line. So where they're tying in, it's a good connection. And we cambered all the other ones to make sure they're all good. So that's an example where we had no choice. We had to do that. And there's a couple places where we've done that, especially at the end of Meadow Lake, where the cul-de-sac is, where they never made the cul-de-sac. It's kind of that weird shape. There's water and sewer lines crisscross underneath there on a diagonal. So we had no choice but to go in and replace those. So that's why we're over budget than what we thought. But the good news is that we put about 40 or 50,000. We thought we'd have to drop the wells. So it's just, it was replacing one thing with the other. But again, I don't see any need to make a budget amendment. We all know why we did it, and we didn't really have a choice. We had to do it anyway, and it's just fine. If you were to look at the utility fund overall for the year right now, our cash flow is negative 14, but we still have the two biggest months. We bill out almost $50,000 a month these next 2 months. So by the end of the year, that cash flow will be positive. So we will have paid for all that CapEx. We're done with the CapEx on the roads for the utility side. Everything's in place for this year. So that will end up positive. Okay, so it's exactly what we do. We do CapEx up at the front, we're negative, and then toward the end of the summer, that's when we make a lot of cash flow, and we recoup it all back. We end up positive for the year. Now, one of the things I'm going to bring up now with regard to this year's budget, I've identified a couple of projects that I wanted to talk to the council about as far as the CapEx goes. So, one of the issues that we have, Linda.
It went on the other page.
Okay.
All
Right, so one of the things that we have talked about is that several years ago we replaced the water meters in the original part of town back when we were doing, right before the road project. And the reason for that was a lot of those meters were the original meters. So those meters had millions and millions of gallons in them. Some of them were broken, but basically they were very old. Many of them were 20 years or more old, 20 years older or more, because the town had never replaced meters. They replaced them when they broke.
And they were probably inaccurate.
They were highly inaccurate. I actually did a project for my students where they calculated the inaccuracies. And based on the inaccuracies, the meter paid for itself in 11 months. That's how inaccurate the meter readings were. And as they get older, they slow down. So they read less water than what you're actually using because they get crudded up. The actual mechanical spinning device gets all crudded up with stuff. So one of the things we had talked about previously was in the shores, a lot of the meters are over 2 million, 3 million. I think Lyell's meters at 5 million, 6 million. They're warranted for $1 million. So it's about time we replace the meters in the shores. At the same time, two things have happened to make that a little bit more timely. The new high-speed internet going in allows there to be now us to transmit all of those meter readings to the cloud. So we don't need to now have any meter readers. We know with land plan, any new development, their requirement is to put in remote read meters from the cloud. So they're going to have to do it. So it makes sense now that we have the high-speed internet to go ahead and do it for the shores, to get it in now and get ahead of it. The meters now that we have high-speed internet, land plan's going to have to do it. We might as well kind of pilot test the remote reading now with the shores. Just go ahead and do it.
It's going to cost roughly, what, $45,000?
So it says $42,000. So the cost estimates I saw were the meter itself is about $350. Sam said his charges are about $75 to reinstall that. And we have to put in new meter boxes because everybody's got those metal cans. Not good for broadcasting. Great for RF shielding in case of nuclear attack. Not good for transmitting to the cloud. So we're going to replace them with the hard plastic meters that we started doing that anyway. All the new jobs have hard plastic. They're more stout. They're not the little irrigation guys. They're bigger than that. So we would replace the meter boxes. You have to have a separate meter lid for transmission. We'll use that time to replace any curb stops. Any meters that are too low, we'll raise them up. We'll bed them out with gravel. We'll do it right now when we replace them. So you can count on about $500 a connection. I counted the shores, and there's 84. There's 84 houses. All the new construction has to have a remote read. So you're talking about a little over 42,000. The software is about $5,000, I think, to get the software. So, we typically spend about north of $100,000 on CapEx, so it's imminently doable. Very easily doable, I think. I think what we do is, like the fire hydrants, we do this for the shores, we learn. Then next we do High Ridge, Meadow Lake, Woodcrest, pick that quadrant to do. And then depending upon how this side of town plays out, we time it out over here. These meters are newer. We might delay, or we'll see. But for sure, everything not on the new roads, everything else has got to be replaced. They're all too old and they need to be replaced. But I think it's imminently reasonable what we can do this for. The other thing what we would do is, for the old meters that we take out, the old ones would be recycled. We'll hand that off to a recycling company and they'll recycle those. They're brass meters. We'll just let them handle that. Anything which is reasonably new, less than 1 million gallons, what we do is we keep those, and what we'll do is we'll use those as construction meters. Because what we find is on the new construction, it's almost with a certainty, the meter that we put in at the start of construction ends up getting run over, damaged, filled with concrete. Something happens to them. So it's easier for us to just put in one that if it gets destroyed, oh well, and it's at CO, at the final CO, that's when we'll install the remote read. That way,